Welcome to the Quotive Corner. Today's quote uses a military metaphor to describe something that has nothing to do with war and everything to do with what happens to a belief once nobody bothers to challenge it anymore. Both teachers and learners go to sleep at their post as soon as there is no enemy in the field. That's John Stuart Mill from On Liberty, published in 1859, one of the foundational texts of liberal philosophy and still one of the most cited defenses of free thought and free speech ever written. Mill was writing in Chapter 2, specifically about religious belief, observing that minority religious groups, the ones constantly forced to defend their convictions against mainstream skepticism, tended to maintain a kind of vitality and seriousness in their faith that majority religions often lost. The majority belief, unchallenged and comfortable, settles into habit. The minority belief, perpetually tested, stays alive. Mill immediately follows it with another sharp line. The fatal tendency of mankind to leave off thinking about a thing once it's no longer doubtful is the cause of half their errors. So, the metaphor itself. Picture a sentry standing post at night, watching for an approaching enemy. As long as there's a real threat, movement in the tree line, sounds in the dark, genuine uncertainty about what's coming, the sentry stays alert, sharp, engaged. But take the enemy away. Remove the threat entirely. Tell the sentry there's nothing left to watch for. What happens? Mill's answer is blunt. They fall asleep. Not because they're lazy or incompetent, but because vigilance is expensive, and the human mind, quite reasonably, stops paying for something it no longer perceives as necessary. Mill is applying that exact mechanism to belief. As long as an idea is being actively challenged, as long as you have to defend it, articulate it, justify it against real opposition, you stay engaged with it. You understand it more deeply than you would if it were simply handed to you and never questioned, because defending something forces you to actually examine its foundations. But once a belief becomes unanimous, once everyone around you already agrees, once there's no enemy left in the field, the mind relaxes. The belief becomes something you hold rather than something you understand. This applies far beyond religion, which is where Mill happened to be writing about it. It applies to political convictions, professional assumptions, family traditions, scientific consensus, personal values, any belief that has gone unchallenged long enough to stop requiring active thought. The danger isn't that the belief is necessarily wrong. The danger is that you no longer actually know why you hold it. You're running on inherited momentum rather than genuine understanding. Think about what this looks like in ordinary life. The professional who learned a set of best practices early in their career and has never had to defend them against a serious alternative because nobody around them disagrees. The person whose political views have never been seriously tested by an opposing argument made in good faith because their entire social circle already agrees with them. The believer, religious or otherwise, whose convictions have never been pressure tested because everyone they know holds the same ones. In every case, the position might still be correct. But the person holding it has stopped doing the work that would let them actually know that, as opposed to simply assuming it. And here's the uncomfortable part. This is not a failure of intelligence or character, it's what minds do by default when the cost of vigilance no longer seems justified. Nobody chooses to sleep at their post. It happens because the enemy left, and staying alert against a threat that isn't there feels reasonably like wasted effort. The problem is that the threat to genuine understanding isn't the same as the threat to the belief's social acceptance. A belief can be socially unchallenged and intellectually unexamined at the same time, and usually is. This is where Mill's argument becomes genuinely demanding, because the natural response is to think, fine, I'll go find opposition, I'll seek out the counter-argument. But Mill is more specific than that, and worth quoting further on this point. He insisted that it wasn't enough to hear objections secondhand, filtered through someone who already agrees with you. You have to encounter the opposing view from someone who actually believes it, who argues it in earnest, who presents it in its strongest and most persuasive form. A weak version of the opposing argument, defeated easily, doesn't sharpen your understanding. It just lets you feel falsely confident. Real vigilance requires real opposition, not a strawman built specifically to lose. That's a much harder standard than most people apply to their own convictions. It's easy to engage with a caricature of the other side. It's much harder to sit with the strongest version of an argument you disagree with and genuinely metabolize why an intelligent, good faith person might hold it. But that's the only kind of engagement that actually keeps a belief alive rather than dormant. There's also a structural implication worth naming. Mill is not just describing individual psychology, he's describing what happens to entire institutions, entire cultures, entire eras of consensus. A society that achieves broad agreement on something important doesn't get to relax and assume the matter is permanently settled in people's understanding. The agreement itself becomes a kind of sedative. The next generation, raised inside the consensus rather than having fought for it, often inherits the conclusion without inheriting the reasoning, which leaves the conclusion vulnerable in ways nobody notices until something actually tests it and finds the foundation hollow. This is, in some sense, the price of winning an argument too completely. Total victory removes the conditions that produced the deep understanding in the first place. The minority position, perpetually under siege, stays sharp out of necessity. The majority position, having won, often gets soft, not because it was wrong, but because it stopped needing to prove itself, and proving itself was what kept it genuinely alive in people's minds rather than just present. Now, the honest counterpoint, because this show doesn't skip it. Constant doubt is not the same as wisdom, and perpetual contrarianism for its own sake is its own kind of failure. Some things are settled enough that relitigating them from scratch every time would be a poor use of finite attention. You don't need to personally rederive the germ theory of disease or redebate whether gravity exists every time the topic comes up. Mill's point isn't that every belief requires permanent active combat. It's that the beliefs that actually matter to how you live, what you value, and how you treat people deserve periodic, honest re-examination, not constant doubt, but the occasional discipline of asking yourself whether you could actually defend this if a smart, sincere person pushed back. That's the practical version of staying awake at your post. Not paranoia, not perpetual instability, just the periodic willingness to ask, do I actually understand why I believe this? Or have I just stopped noticing that nobody's asked me to defend it in a long time? Mill was writing about religious conviction in Victorian England, but the century he described is standing post in every mind that has ever settled into comfortable agreement and quietly stopped paying attention to why. Thanks for spending a few minutes here at the Quotive Corner. If this one made you think of a belief you haven't actually examined in longer than you'd like to admit, that's worth a second look. And remember, wisdom isn't in the quote, it's in the reflection. I'll see you in the next one.